Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Startup Conversations. I'm your host, Roderick Bates, and with me I have a guest that I'm very excited about. I have with me Kitae Kim from Foveate, and I always do a little call before these sessions to talk about people's products. And this was one in which I actually had to cut that call short because I said, you know what, we're getting into too much good stuff in advance of the actual recording, and I want to make sure other people could hear what we're talking about. So, to say I'm excited would be an understatement. This one's going to be great. But of course, I should really let the guests introduce themselves. So, Kite?
Yes, thank you so much, Roderick. So I'm Kitae Kim. I'm one of the co-founders of Foveate, and I used to be an experience architect. And yeah, basically my experience working in the industry, designing these really amazing technology-laden built environment works is what led me to eventually designing Foveate. But we call it pursuit intelligence, and the reason why I call that is it's a combination of really trying to help design firms go after the right work, qualify the right clients, but also present themselves better and have tracking for everything that they do and touch. So basically solving all the problems that I had, working on RFPs for years and years, slaving away in InDesign and thinking, how can we do this better? There's got to be a better way. It's 2026, it's been almost 30 years. Like, let's do something else.
So, you're hitting on something that I really like. And I think this is one of the things I talk to a lot of different startups, and they all do different things. There's certain hot topics out there, but I have never talked to one that is focusing on the pursuit side of AEC. And what I find so fascinating, this is a part of the process where you actually have to get the work, right? And if you don't get the work, you don't keep the doors open.
Uh-huh.
And you also don't get paid for going out and trying to get the work. And you may not, if you don't get paid and you don't get the job, it's really bad. If you don't get paid and you do get the job, well, at least, that's a good thing. But from your experience, where do you see like the pain points actually occurring? So you said you're in practice. Was it in finding the work in the first place? Was it in making sure it was the right content for the audience? Was it improving your hit rate from things that you pursued versus projects you got? Where was the real challenge that you experienced? And also, you said you're an experienced architect, or you're
Yeah.
an experienced architect, or is that the category of
No,
architecture
like the
you're in?
category. So like
Okay.
Gensler DXD is probably the one company that most people are familiar with in this category, but that's the experience design arm of Gensler. So it's really technology, media, audiovisual integrated projects. So think LED walls, projections, interactive installations, stuff like that. I come from that side, mostly in the fine art world. My co-founder Ian comes from it more in like the corporate world and experiential design. But kind of where the split is between traditional experiential, which is like, things like Coachella or art festivals and stuff like that, is that those are
These are all
temporary.
things that are way cooler than I ever get to attend.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I actually started in art school and then I switched to architecture halfway through. And my focus in art school was on media art. So that's really where I brought that into my architecture leanings and sensibilities. And, I have always loved sci-fi and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I led myself there. But to answer your question, Roderick, when I was at this art studio and I was working on all these RFPs, I was just so tired of doing tedious things, and I was really got a lot of freedom to design the process. My boss was very open minded in that, and he was kind of like, "Yeah, you just go figure it out." They didn't really have a process; they outsourced
Well, how could you have
everything
a
at the
process
time.
for some of these things? I mean, it sounds like these are the type of projects where there's no template.
Yeah, I mean, but there has to be like a slide template, right? So
Well, there's
like
got
they
to be
didn't have
that.
it.
Yes, for that
Right?
there's a template.
So
Yeah.
that didn't exist, right? So I was like, wait a minute, we didn't have this, but we didn't have like a process for how we created renders. We were just doing Photoshop collages at the time. Granted, this is 2016, so this is 10 years ago. So that's really when, I got to bring in things like Unreal because I was like, hey, real time makes sense for us. We do interactive installations with video walls, LEDs, projections. Like we need to have motion. And then we found that, doing things like that actually made our win rate increase a lot. Like double digit percentages increase because it was real. It was even if the fidelity wasn't as high as like a V-Ray render, it was motion was moving around. It was like seeing the idea 360 without like a you know watercolor or clay style render. It was really the more realistic stuff. So that really helped increase the level of fidelity that we could do in our RFP proposals, and then it decreased the amount of time that we spent on rendering and re-rendering because
Yeah, but you're
bosses like to
creating, but
change their times,
what you
change their
just
minds.
described is a huge amount of time, though, to create that type of content, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say as the person who was one of the only people on that team who was actually doing all the modeling, rendering, um, and proposal design, I just got really good at it. So, the fewer kind of people involved, sometimes it's a bit easier. My boss did all the research and writing, the actual proposal writing and stuff like that. So, we were able to split it up that way. But then with InDesign, it's just so tedious to collaborate on it. I'd have to like send him a whole zip if he was traveling, then he'd download it, have all maybe fonts are missing, edit the text, paste it back in. I'd be like, oh, the formatting's wrong now because the text length has changed. Like it was super tedious. So I really found being able to make that process consistent. And I think about this like a restaurant, right? Like you have to make the back of house, the kitchen super consistent in order to have a good Michelin star level restaurant, right? Like the more repeatable everything is, the more that you can practice it. And the fewer new things you have to do each time, the easier and better and faster it gets. So I think for us, we spent years really consolidating and trying to make this pursuit practice a lot more efficient and a lot more consistent. So I think that was key. And that helped increase our win rate, decrease the amount of time and money we're spending on things, and increase the level of detail we could have in our concepts, make them more realistic, make them more fleshed out. So it really
I mean, I
helped
really
increase all
want to
that.
dive into like these experiences you're creating, but I realize we're here actually to talk about your startup, right? So you've taken a
Yeah,
ton of these lessons, though. And what's interesting, I saw you did a LinkedIn post saying, these are the things I wish I had. But it sounds in some ways, actually, what Foveate has done is taken a lot of the lessons that you've already created and learned and applied them in a replicable toolkit for other people.
100%. Yes. I mean, really, Foveate is born out of my struggles with this problem. And, I really thought during the pandemic, this would have gotten better. Like people would have figured out we got to collaborate better on pursuits. Within our own teams, we have to make them more efficient. We have to get visibility into our win rate. Like, nowadays I ask firms, what's their win rate? Almost nobody can actually give me an answer. They're like,
Maybe they don't
I
want to
think
know. Like there's some question. What do they say? You shouldn't ask a question you don't want the answer to.
right, right. So yeah, maybe it's part of them not wanting to know. And if I ask them, and how much money do you spend a year on pursuits? That's also something where they're kind of they don't really calculate. Also, maybe they don't want to know. But I would say the industry average is, from what I've seen, numbers wise, just in stats versus my own anecdotal information, is below 30%. So it's
Oh,
somewhere
I'd say, yeah.
between.
I mean, I know from my experience, if we were hitting 30%, life was pretty good.
And that's kind of crazy, right? So this is really where I think Foveate is solving a huge problem. Is if people are losing 7 out of 10 deals. That is a horrible way to run a business, right? Like that
Well,
is
it
just
depends on how big those three are that you get. And then I think the other question is knowing if you're even qualified to go after some projects or not. I remember going into an interview and we really thought we had it in the bag. And as we were walking to the room, the team before us was walking out and they were all laughing, slapping each other on the back like they had known each other for
uh,
years. I mean, it was clearly this was a buddy buddy moment. And then we're like, wow, great. We're going into a warm room. And we get into the room, we get up there, and then we are faced with an absolutely stone faced board and like didn't even ask a single question the whole time. It was like, we probably should have had a little more intelligence about who else was going into that room because we were clearly not the favorite.
yeah, you were the disadvantaged partner in
Yeah,
that
we were like the
scenario.
stalking horse, someone they brought in just to kind of, say, oh, yeah, we talked to a lot of firms, but we already
Hmm.
wanted this one.
Yeah, yeah, and we've been in that situation in the past, and I wrote about this in my post where sometimes you have to just do a proposal because it's based on your boss's gut feeling, and that's like kind of a horrible position to be in as somebody who's the proposal manager or the biz dev lead on that project because
Yeah,
you're
but
kind
the
of like
boss really likes it when they're right.
yeah, I mean, but I think this is where I've noticed that firms don't have a strict go no go process. I
No,
think
they really
big,
don't, right? Yeah, and if
yeah,
they do, they're willing to throw it out
hmm
because someone has a gut instinct.
Right. And I think, Big is one of the only studios I've spoken to who has a pretty strict one. And I think something interesting about go no go processes at design firms is that it's still gut based. Like, even though they have a process, it's literally five of the team members and principals are in a room talking about the RFP, talking about, what the relationship was like with the client, how did the past meetings go? But it's not very comprehensive and it doesn't actually like give you that much information to go on because usually the most persuasive person in the room ends up winning. And a lot of times is the principal or owner who has this gut feeling and they keep on, stating their opinion. And for you as like a lower level, person in the organization, even if you're the director of BD or something, you get overruled. So what Foveate helps with is actually giving you that proof, right? Giving you the numbers of like, all right, we've compared the capabilities of your firm with the RFP, with some other, intelligence or meeting notes that you have. And that's where it can kind of give you a score of like, we think there's a 70% chance that you should go for this, and a 30% chance you shouldn't. So having that information that kind of gives you, more, just more confidence going into it. And then also knowing what to pitch, right? So I think that's a huge problem where when I talk to firms, they say, yeah, we don't really know what we're doing right or wrong, or if thing is going to wow the clients or not. And a lot of times, we're a bit narcissistic as designers, right? We want to propose our idea and we get something in there. And I would say half the time the client sees it and they're like, what is this? Like, how did we get here? Right. And I think that's also where the storytelling aspect is missing, right? Because if you can lead them on that journey, I see experiential design people do this super well because it comes from ads. So they are really good storytellers. Like they can lead the client down a path and get them to basically sign multi-million dollar deals just based off that story alone. Steve Jobs is famous for doing this as well. I think that's a skill that architects are unfortunately lacking. So that's really where the deck side of Foveate comes in is how do you tell a story more interactively, more immersively, more cinematically, right? I think a lot of these are inspired by stories from other creatives. And I remember I saw an interview with Christopher Nolan, the film director, and he was saying the only other profession he would ever do is be an architect. I was like, wow, that's so interesting that he would say that. And like, why is that?
Yeah.
And
Does
he
he
was,
know anything about
yeah,
architecture?
right. And it's
Maybe.
like, what does he know? And then he goes on. He says, film is storytelling through time and architecture is storytelling through space. So he tries to bring that into his films, and Inception's probably like the more critical like foray into this, where he's actually looking at using the architecture to tell a story. And it kind of made me think, yes, architects really are great storytellers, in the building, like Frank Lloyd Wright and how he like compresses spaces and then opens them up, right? There is a story that is told, especially like the École des Beaux-Arts era, or French architecture did that super well. Uh, but I think maybe we've lost that with PDFs, right? With the InDesign,
Well,
like
you have, but
book
you also
making.
mentioned some truly luminaries in the world of architecture. And I mean, I think we're all great and whatnot, but not everyone's going to rise to that particular level of the profession.
That's true. I mean, I think we should set the bar high, right? There's a lot of schooling that goes into
There is,
this,
but there's
and
a lot of buildings that like, I had a former manager that always say, it's a box with windows until further notice. And I think they were quoting somebody else when they said that, but I love that line because that's kind of like there's a lot of architecture. It's a box with windows,
yeah, this is true. This is
but
true. But I
even a
think
box with windows needs a great story. And maybe that story is about budget, and that's all that client cares about.
I think there is also an interesting side to this where I was lucky to have, I guess, more subversive professors going to architecture school. So Anka Tranafirsku is a great professor, educator, and architect. But she's the one who taught me, if you want to build what you want to build, you kind of have to like sneak it into the design story, right? So I think that's something perhaps we've forgotten about as well is we all want to make really beautiful, amazing things, experiences, structures, but we have to translate that into terms that clients who are non-technical, non-designers need to understand. So that's something that we have in Foveate as
Yeah,
well,
you have to
is that
sell them.
yeah, it's like a personalization tool. So
Yeah.
being able to enter in information about a client, research them, qualify them, but also know what to pitch, like or how to translate that language to something that means something to this other person. So an example that I have is uh, a director of design at FIFA. She's the events. director of events there, and she's a former athlete. So the client profiler in Foveate will tell you, oh, this person is probably super goal oriented, not really into the detailing. Like they're not going to care about that. They care about the teamwork. They care about the outcomes, right? Having something bigger, bolder, a vision that they can get behind. So don't pitch something that's about like very reserved, like Swiss minimal detailing, right? Like that is not going to land with this person. They want a bold, flashy idea, something more spectacular that they can go and show off, right? So like if you think about stadium design, that's usually how stadiums happen. Is design is a bigger, bolder, flashier thing. Um, that matters to that person that they can justify to the rest of their org is like, we got this amazing initiative that we're going to be working on. And of
Yeah, it's
course,
the
if your
big
firm
moves
has,
in a
yeah,
project like that for sure. So, what's interesting is that we sort of danced around some aspects of what Foveate is in some ways, but I'm going through some of these things here and I'm like, wow, this is a lot of different moving parts that are quite fascinating. Like one is it'll tell you whether or not you should go for the job. Right? This voice of reason. I'm like, well, okay, like, how does that work? And then it says also tells you how to tell the story of your project, whether it's in the interview itself, or I'm assuming once you actually have the job and like how do you tell the story with the building? And then you talk about this idea of you have a profiler of the people, like when you're going out for the job, who's actually going to be in the room and how do you cater towards their particular proclivities? And then it says, okay, and then how do you know what type of process is appropriate for that particular client? And that maybe I'm just scratching the surface, but that's a lot out of one piece of software. Maybe we
yeah,
should go through and be like, okay, what is like? Let's just step back again because maybe I didn't get enough. But like,
yeah,
what is Foveate, right? Like,
yeah.
what are all the parts here?
Yeah, I guess it's really born out of my experience with the whole biz dev process, right? So I'll say what it's not or like where it ends. It's not a design tool, so it doesn't help you with any 3D modeling or stuff like that. It's not a prospecting tool, so it doesn't like go find leads for you and enter them. It sits kind of in that space between initial client contact and interaction, and then the actual sending of a proposal. So it handles everything in that gap. So in that pursuit state. So basically, the idea with Foveate is, if you have this information about a client, you've gotten an RFP. How do you chat with that RFP? And it does use AI for a lot of these features. How do you chat with that
And for those that
RFP?
may not be 100% familiar, because we get a bit of a diverse audience here, when you say RFP, what exactly is that? And what does it usually include?
Yeah, so that's a request for a proposal. So that's usually basically a spec that a client has created to send out to multiple architects or design firms to get them all to bid and propose an idea for a building for them. And usually within it, there is a set budget, there is set objectives. Sometimes they'll give you information about who the stakeholders are, within their own organization, the city that they're in, stuff like that, and then like the information about the site, so where the building's going to go, where they can build, what they can't build, how much square footage they think that they need for the building, requirements of the program of the building. So it might be like, this is a science lab for a university. So here's all the information about that. We have 10,000 students in our program who come every year. They need to have like wet rooms, they need to have lockers, they need to have XYZ. So the RFP has all this information about them, and then it tries to get information of you as the architect and an idea for you to propose.
And
So
what do you need to propose in response to that? What's the typical response look like?
yeah, so it could be a simple letter response, and that's usually if you're the advantage partner, where it's just kind of like stating your capabilities as an architect and saying like we understand your goals, blah blah blah, and that's just like a simple document. But most of the time, I would say it is a full design proposal. They're asking you for a multi double digit page PDF or something that has renders, that has your concept for what the site should be, has a little bit of the technical specifications of like how tall the building is. These are like the design, like earlier design drawings, so like let's say concept level, how you're going to meet their requirements, stuff like that. And it's pretty interesting because when you look at the raw numbers for what firms spend on this, usually it's 3 to 4 team members, and it's about $30,000 per proposal that
I
they
mean, you're
spend.
mentioning like something that sounds like a small book essentially that
Oh
you're
yeah,
and then is
it's
that
like 40
presented in
pages.
person as well? Is there a companion with that?
It should be presented in person. So a lot of times they'll send it out to firms, and then each firm kind of sets up their own call to present to the client. Especially nowadays, it's mostly remote. But a lot of architects still are not presenting them live, which is a huge mistake. You should always
Wow,
try
so
to
you
present
just
live.
send in a this book, and then you kinda keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, and with no
Whew.
visibility, right? And did the client open it? You know, did they get it? Did they like it? So there's a lot of disadvantages if you're not presenting live. And then usually, best practices are you do present it live, and then you give them a leave behind. So that's like a PDF or a link to a slide deck or something like that that they can sit with and kind of mull over. It could be a video, but this is really the kind of deck side of Foveate is being able to send or being able to present this live, interactive slide deck experience, which has really awesome video and uh, render carousels and stuff like that, things that can kind of immerse the client into a design. But also the tracking aspect. So, how can you basically be able to have your marketing coordinator, director of BD, see when the client opened it, see which sections of the deck they spent time on, so they can follow up and basically
So it's
surface
almost like a
objections.
marketing-based approach. Like, if you think about like a salesperson sends out content, they're already doing all this, right? They can tell where the target was interested in a particular content, where they spent the time, who they shared it with, all that kind of stuff is sort of part and parcel of marketing. But you're right, that's not part of the traditional architectural RFP or response or pursuit.
Yes,
Um,
yes. I draw a lot of inspiration from digital sales rooms, which are basically sales software, very popular in finance, real estate, government, tech, um, I, I believe medicine as well, for high ticket deals, complex deals with multiple stakeholders. Architects already use virtual data rooms, which are things like DocSend and Box,
mhm.
which are basically a consolidated branded client's link that has all the documents in it. The digital sales rooms take that another step further where you can actually tell a story with that. So not only does it consolidate all the information there, but also clients can comment on it. So they don't have to sign in. They just, leave their name and they can comment on anything that you upload. So Foveate is really looking at that and being like, oh, people have already invented a $1.6 billion software industry that's been around for 16 years that does all this stuff. Like, why have architects not caught on? We're the people who sell super expensive, complex deals to
Yeah, it's true.
people,
Some of the most expensive stuff. I mean,
right?
aside from like aircraft carriers or stealth bombers, we're pretty much up there.
Right? And like we're still using 1999 tech. Just the
Yeah.
PDF and the email. Like you can't even see if the client opened it, right? If they want to go share that with their stakeholders, and there's like 11 stakeholders on these bigger projects, if not more, they all have to like now go into their Slack, go into their teams, go into their email thread and comment on it there. And they can't say like, hey, let's all comment on this one paragraph in page 7, right? Of this 52-page PDF that I'm sending you. With something like Foveate, they just have a link. They can all comment on it. The architects can see it and they can be like, oh, okay, the CFO clearly had a problem with this one particular section. We should address that next meeting or in an email, right? So it just gives everybody the tools to basically collaborate on a deal together. So a lot of digital sales rooms are called revenue collaboration because they're all trying to make money together. So basically turning this adversarial relationship in architecture, client versus architect, into an actual partnership is the idea, right? How are we not turning this into a yes, turning this from a yes or no deal with the client into like how are we going to do this together?
And you mentioned something about this idea of creating a profile so you understand who you're talking to, right? If you're telling a story, it depends if I'm trying to tell a bedtime story to a kid is going to be very different than if I'm trying to tell a story to make someone buy something. So I'm thinking here, you must understand who you're trying to talk to.
Yes.
Well, how does that work with that profiler? What's sort of what are the inputs? What are the outputs? And how does someone use that to guide what story they tell?
Yeah, so this is really born out of my experience in the fine art world. So when I was working at this art and design studio, we have collectors. These are billionaire collectors, very busy people who are buying this art as basically the last thing that they can buy. They've had the nice cars, the nice real estate, the nice yachts, right? Art is the last thing that they can purchase. And what's really important about the selling side of the fine art world is knowing who the buyer is, and you want to get your art into the right hands, into the right collection. You don't want to just sell it to somebody who's going to resell it on the Sotheby's market later, and that's going to ruin your own portfolio and
Yeah,
cultural
you want
cachet
someone
as an
that'll
artist.
collect, help it appreciate, all those sort of things, yeah.
Right? So how do you sell that to the right person? And then how do you translate this process of buying it into something that they can understand and are motivated to do? So that's where, we used to basically just have like a notebook, like a dossier on these collectors, right? And be like, oh, they're really into let's say Mexican art across time periods, and this person's collection spans multiple centuries. They have their own private museum in Monterrey, Mexico, right? It's like, okay, now we have this information. We know something about them. They have a historical leaning. So the artwork that we're going to propose for them to purchase will be one that was inspired by Mesoamerican Mexican art from, 200 BC that takes this particular lineage and is an extension of their existing collection, right? So you have to like be super intuitive and know that. And that takes like a certain kind of person. So we had a really good registrar and head of, she was like our head gallerist. So she was super good with clients and she knew this and she taught me some of these things. But I was thinking like, man, if you're a design firm, like you just are not trained in this. And even if you're the best principal at your org, like you probably don't know this stuff. You probably don't
No,
get
I
that
mean,
many
and a lot of
reps in.
times, and
It's
most, I
hard.
mean, yeah, sometimes you know these people, but sometimes it's the first time you've worked with this particular client or responded to a proposal from this particular client.
Mhm.
So yeah, how do you know who it is? And I remember there was always like, it always seemed like there was one person in the room that really made the decisions, and you didn't always know who that person was. And one of the big challenges you need to figure out as quickly as possible who that person was and what mattered to them.
Mhm, mhm. So that's the whole point of the client profiler in Foveate, and it connects to our stakeholder networks, which is basically trying to surface that first from the RFP, so in the research, like figure out the org chart, figure out who the people are at these different companies. But then when you send out a deck in Foveate, you can make it so that it's gated with email or password, or they have to put in their name. So you can figure out basically who's who and see who's looking at this thing because all the stakeholders are going to look at this document, right? So instead of just sending an email, which your client has to forward to their stakeholders, why don't we just send a link that basically gives everybody the ability to chat and collaborate around your proposal? So that's how we figure out those people. And then, yeah, we use LLMs to figure out basically the client research side of what matters to each person based upon things like their dwell time on certain sections, the things that they comment on, what they're saying, and then also research. So if you have meeting notes or you have interviews with them from press, for example, you can go ahead and generate a pretty good client profile report on who this person is.
Well, I like this because you're combining an element that's like sort of a research focused, a sort of more passive research of maybe things that are already out there or and whatnot. So you're mining existing content. And then I like this other piece where you're using the RFP that you just sent as a mechanism to kind of almost study them. It's like you said, if they're focusing on the finance section, maybe that's what, you can kind of get a sense of, okay, this is where the priorities are. If they're more really focused, say, on I don't know, maybe some of the more experiential pieces, that also gives you insight into them. So I like how you combine these multiple elements. And so you've created a model that essentially synthesizes these various components and then to come up with a composite profile.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, we also have a function where the stakeholders who receive the deck can pick their role. So if they're the CEO, CCO, CFO, like procurement, like there's the ability for them to self-select so that we can basically tell a little bit easier what their role is and what probably matters to them. Um, but yeah, basically the behind the scenes, it is trained to understand and be aware of how people's emotional decisions will affect their decision making. Like there's this field of research called psychographics, and it draws a lot from that. And it's of my own personal interest, but you're learning a lot in the art world because you're dealing with literal crazy people. Like billionaire collector people are not normal. They're all
No, no, they got
incredibly
to where they are
idiosyncratic,
because they thought differently, for sure.
right? So like trying to figure out what matters to them is really important. And when I talk to firms, they do some research, which is basically like a cursory Google search because that's all they can think to do, right? But the problem with that is that just gives you like statistical information, right? That doesn't help you create a psychological profile on this other person. Um, that would actually give you the information that you need. There's this very interesting concept in Korean called nunchi, and nunchi is kind of like emotional intelligence (EQ), but it's a little bit more. Um, I don't know, let's say social or like a little bit more abstract than like the clinical definition. But basically, it's like having this emotional intelligence where you can kind of read somebody's body language, you can read the room, you can understand like what the vibe is, right? And it's like some people have really good nunchi and some people don't. So yeah, I'm sure we all know somebody where you're like, God damn it, Bob, like couldn't you read the room? Like stop talking about that thing, right? And so this is where I think we can give tooling that helps figure that out for people. And I think when I talk to folks who are using AI in biz dev right now at design firms and in most companies, to be honest, they are struggling with making the process repeatable. So oftentimes there's one person at a firm, let's say one out of 25, who is super good with AI and they're figuring out like, oh, I should use this tool to go do research on the RFP. I should chat with it here. And then I'm going to use this other tool like Perplexity because it's really good at search for
Yeah,
market
they got this whole
research,
layer cake of agents that are all
right?
tied in elsewhere, and
But
yeah,
most
no
of them
one
don't
else
have
knows how to use it.
yeah, nobody really has the actual flow down. Like it's very copy and paste manual. And then I'll see at these firms, this person has created like a document that shows step by step how to do it. But as soon as they give that to somebody else, that other person fails at doing it because it's just too complicated. And the other person is the one who has the intuition and like the vision of what they're trying to do. So they know the questions to ask the LLM. They they know what to copy and paste, what to ignore. But the second person, right? They're just trying to like get their job done.
Yeah, this
And
kind of reminds me how Rhino or Grasshopper would be, Rhino with Grasshopper or like Dynamo or something, where there'd be some like two really sharp people in the office who create these crazy scripts, do remarkable things. And they'd be like, "Here you go," and then people are like, I don't
you
even
just
know
can't
where to
do it.
start. Yeah,
Right? They're like, you give them all these sliders. They're like, you look, you have all this control. And the other person's like, man, I'm just never going to use this.
yeah.
Right?
It's like I
So
know what I
that's
want, but this doesn't help me get there.
So this is what we're trying to solve with Foveate too, is how do you make this process repeatable so like a biz dev person could go do all this by themselves and then generate a really great looking deck and presentation in response to this RFP and then have like designer and principal come in and get invited to the deck and be able to edit it and put the final touches on it. So how can you basically, research, qualify clients and RFPs better, generate that pursuit go no go, then figure out how to personalize that to the client, figure out what to pitch, create a deck from all that material, collaborate with your team to be able to, make it look like your brand, make it look like uh, the level of quality that you have in your InDesign files, but then also have multimedia, really great video support, immerse the client in the design, give them more cinematic experience, send it out on a link, and then track user engagement with it. So Foveate is supposed to do all
That
that
makes
stuff at
sense. I mean,
once.
it's a lot of pieces, but there are some things it doesn't do, as you're saying, like it doesn't model and things like that. So a user is still on the hook for a couple things. Like one of them is they still need to collect some information that gets fed into to
Hmm.
Foveate. Like they still need to have, say, meeting notes or things like that. That can help define. They still need to have the RFP for a given project. But you also mentioned certain types of collateral, like a multimedia experiences or videos or renders, things like that, or maybe even also verbal descriptions and things, written descriptions. So when it comes to that content, does Foveate provide guidance, but they're on their own for creating it?
Yeah, so we do have generative AI media built into Foveate. So if you need to do text to video, image to image, like you can create collateral in Foveate. You can even upload a 3D model from SketchUp or Rhino or whatever, be able to generate renders right from there, or walk clients through like a Gaussian splat tour, stuff like that. So you can create the collateral within the project. Currently, it doesn't recommend like specific prompts for generation, but it does recommend basically how to tell that story and like kind of what things you should do. So it might tell you like, if this person is very goal oriented and they want a spectacular vision, like you should do that in your renders.
Hmm.
Like you should have a big flashy full spread video that is going to seduce the client. So it'll kind of guide you in that way, but it doesn't go and solve it all for you. It's really designed to be kind of like I, I guess co-pilot, but even that's like the
It
wrong
is, but
word.
it's a co-pilot, but it's also a little bit of a hosting platform, right? And then, facilitates the feedback. One question, though, I also have here, and something that we've been at Chaos been toying with, is the idea of um, being having a critic. One of the challenges that there isn't always a third party to stand over your shoulder and be like, "Oh, you're going to show that? That's hideous. Don't show that." And does Foveate have that capacity too, where it'll tell you, like, if you're off the mark in something, like this doesn't align with what it thinks will get you the project?
Yeah, so it doesn't have like a feedback for like vision stuff, like images
Mhm.
and videos inside of your deck, but it does have it for the text. So it might tell you to like improve this kind of writing or something like that. Uh, like if something's too technical, so there is the ability to like remove archispeak, remove the jargon,
Yeah.
right? Make it so an eighth grader could understand. So there is like a button for AI text where it basically will personalize whatever you write to that client or to that group of stakeholders and basically try to write something that meets everybody's needs. So, for example, let's say public engagement is a big part of this project. It's happening in a particular neighborhood, let's say in London, right? So, if you personalize it, click personalize, it'll basically take uh, the simulation of a conversation between all the stakeholders. And it might say, like, oh, the person who's the public representative has a really strong voice here. We're going to go ahead and personalize this text so it addresses some of those needs.
I like that, and that makes a lot of sense. And like you say, Copilot, I think is the right approach there. But it also allows for that designer to express their individual design style. Like it's not sort of commodifying everything to some sort of an AI style. It's rather it's
No,
still them.
no. I think we're having an interesting conversation that's burgeoning in the industry where AI is making execution go to zero. So the cost to do anything is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I forget which firm this was, but they delivered a project like twice as fast as they had slated, but charged the client the same amount. And the client was like, "Whoa, what the hell, guys? Like, you bill hourly. Like, why am I getting charged for the full amount when you did it in half the time?" And I think we've had this really terrible, decades long decline in the industry where we've been stuck hourly ever since firm guidelines were considered monopolistic or whatever. And now we can't justify our value. So now firms are really in this sticky spot. And I think it's going to continue unless we can demonstrate our value better, where we have to move away from billing hourly instead, really bill upon value, right? Because it's going
It
to,
is. It's good to bill on value until all of a sudden the client asks for a ton of revisions. And then he's like, "Boy, I really should have billed on hour." So it's like either way. I think you're coming into a tough spot.
I think there's a stat that over 80% of construction projects or built environment projects go past the actual due date. So I think we're already in this point where we've been driving prices to the bottom of the barrel and we can't deliver. Just like if that's the stat, and I don't think I could name more than 20% of projects that actually completed on time. Like clearly
On
we're not
time and on budget.
right. Like clearly we're doing it wrong.
No, that's true. But there's also a lot of stakeholders that go outside of just the pure architecture that may be driving that one way or the other.
hmm
But
Which
you're
we
right.
could surface. We should surface.
That's a phase two sort of thing, I would suppose. But what's fascinating here too is this is not where Foveate started.
No, no. We actually started much more on the 3D and rendering side and more with like virtual tours and 3D walkthroughs and stuff like that. And the genesis of how Foveate got to where it is now is really based upon that customer feedback. Um, and kind of seeing where people actually need help. So, when we started Foveate, it was really targeted just at experiential folks mostly who needed to share 3D walkthroughs of a project before it was built.
Mhm.
And we found that people were just appending a Foveate link into their PDF. And they were like, yeah, we just want it for sales and like the bid process and really give us an extra edge over somebody else. And we don't have to render a whole video
Mhm.
just to do that. They can like walk themselves through the project, even if it's a lower fidelity, 3D model and a link. Firms were like, yeah, screen sharing Rhino, that's really effective for us. And I was like, okay, this is like very simple, like zero 0.5 steps forward in progress. But then hearing people say, we're attaching it as a link in our PDF. I was like, oh, we're clearly not actually improving the industry or like progressing enough if that's all
No,
people
no.
are
I mean,
doing,
there's so much of it is still phone calls,
right?
PDFs,
So
emails.
this is where I'm like, I think we have to just take on the entire pursuit process. We can't just be this thing that's tacked on the end. Not only will it not be effective for our customers and clients, but it won't help us survive as a business, right? You can't really expand that. And I think we've been lucky to find kind of beachhead customers in the experience design space who are the ones who are like, we need to tell more immersive, more cinematic, more interesting stories with our designs. So they're the ones who've been asking for like motion inside of decks, right? They're like, we want something where even if it's a 5-second loop of the video playing as the background for each slide, like they're like, wow, that just looks awesome. Like the client loves that. Like they're gonna fall in love with this idea. And then figuring out like the tracking side by looking at other industries like digital sales
But
rooms
you're doing
or
something that's
sales.
interesting though. I mean, and I'm kind of showing my age here, but you're saying though that you can just share a link and then have the entire response, the RFP response, be online.
Yeah, why
Right,
not?
and that's what it's so different because I'm in the world of like, oh, you created a PowerPoint, right? And you share a PowerPoint, and you're saying, no, no, that ship's gone. Like that time is over, and now you're in a very different place where people are completely capable of receiving a link and having that be the mechanism by which you are presenting your work.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to firms, the pandemic really was a cultural shift where firms started picking up Miro, right? And they were like, we're going to use Miro to collaborate day to day. Instead of presenting at the client's office or they're coming to your office, people just present online now. Like, people don't really go to each other's offices anymore just for a simple meeting, right? It's not cost
Maybe that's what's
effective, it's
killing the hit rate.
inefficient.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's probably not helping with the hit rate. But I would also say what I've seen is firms were relying on their client relationships prior to the pandemic for most of their work. It's a very referral based business,
It is a
but
lot of, yeah. The majority of your work comes from previous clients.
the pandemic wiped out a lot of those relationships. Where there were many developers who were simply over leveraged. Interest rates, skyrocketed at 3.8%, and all of a sudden, these people who had lots of different debt based investments just couldn't play anymore. So I've heard multiple architects be like, "We're looking for new business." Like I was it the Deltec AIA report that came out that's like over 56% of firms are looking for new buildings now, new clients. It's kind of like, yeah,
That's an
everybody's
interesting
looking for new
stat.
business at the
Yeah, I
same
mean
time.
that's a really interesting stat. And the other thing I think that's interesting from conversations I've had is that we're also looking at the client cohort being of a different demographic. I mean, obviously
Mhm.
time marches on, but it seems like there's been a shift. And we were talking to some people, and they're saying, we're getting more people who like grew up with video games, like especially like person shooter games and things like that. And so they expect a more dynamic experience, and they're comfortable with a more dynamic experience.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's definitely true. Like, a lot of people say that the older folks won't be able to do this, right? And I think that's not really true in the sense that anybody can go through a link and like go through a slide deck. It's not hard. It's the same mechanism that they're using in PowerPoint. They do with Google Slides. Really, it's kind of just our industry that's lagging behind and thinking that there's an
Well, I guess there's two
adoption
elements
problem
though. It's
there.
like the capability versus expectations, right? And I think yours a good point is that everyone should be able to access and engage with these type of experience.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
But there's only one group that really expects it. And of course, as you probably go after more jobs and the whole industry raises its game, everyone's going to start expecting more interactive and
I think
dynamic
they already do,
experiences.
man. Like, I remember I was talking to these developers in Boston, and the owner side rep is a former architect now, on the real estate side because she got tired of being burnt out. And then she's like, I'm so surprised that even the biggest firms who are working with us, they present so poorly. And she was like, they don't even have video. And I was like, that's pretty crazy to think about. Like,
It
if you
is.
are a multi-thousand person firm, you're not going into a presentation with like a video fly through of a project for your, you know,
Well, it works really well
multi-million
if
developer
nobody else
client.
you're going against does a video fly through. But as soon as they start to, yeah, you're at a real disadvantage.
Yeah. So I think as soon as one person starts doing it well and winning, like everybody else is going to have to start doing it. And I think when you look at, all the great work Chaos is doing, there's a lot of video being generated. There's a lot of images, a lot of videos. Clearly, it's it's becoming normal, but what's not normal is the way to show it. So what firms are doing now is they're like, yeah, we put it on YouTube, we put it on Vimeo, put it on Dropbox.
Embedded into PowerPoint.
Yeah, embed it into PowerPoint, but for the client experience, it's not great for them because you're jumping around to different tools or maybe it's taking time to load. It's not frictionless, right? And as people who are designers of great experiences through a building and space, it's kind of like, well, we should do that for our client experience, right? Why don't we make it easy for the most important person in the room who's greenlighting our project and basically letting our studio survive, right? Give them a nice
Absolutely. No,
experience.
that makes total sense. And I like this mentality here about frictionless and easy. It's so easy to get yourself tied up in edge cases, like, oh, it's a confidential project. How do I do it? And you're like, well, yeah, and you can put it behind permissions and things like that. It's not a big deal, but it's easy for people to try to justify why they're doing things or they used to do things. When you look at this, you mentioned some places where there's AI and some places where there's not. And one of the interesting things I'm hearing more and more from people is, is when it comes to an AI strategy, very few people have like a really coherent statement on it. It's like sometimes it's like, oh, we're an AI company, but the truth is, it's like, well, they have a grab bag of AI technology. But I'm curious from your perspective, what is your AI strategy? Like, where do you deploy AI and why do you deploy AI where you do? And also, are you feeling as a startup like a lot of pressure? You're like, hey, where's your AI? Perhaps that exceeds what's actually useful from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you asked me that question a year or two ago, I'd be like, yeah, people always ask us what AI features are in Foveate. And now I think the word AI has been used so much that we don't even like to mention it because it's a commodity thing at this point. And honestly, a lot of the AI features in Foveate have been surfaced from what firms are already doing. This person I spoke to you about who's at a firm who's like that 1 in 25 employee who's researching and doing AI stuff on their own. It's really many of the AI features are born out of that. I'm like, oh wow, this person came up with an amazing use case. They just are having trouble translating that across the team, making it repeatable. So we'll just go ahead and add that in. So when we have these customer conversations, and somebody tells me that they're using Notebook LM to research a PDF, I'm like, okay, we'll just add that feature in to Foveate and make it so that you can
Nice.
do it in here.
Yeah, I
Like,
love Notebook LM, by the way. Just a little shout out to the good
it's
folks there
great.
at Google. I love it. Yeah, especially if I'm given. We recently got some really complex research papers that people are using on AI training, and I couldn't believe how it made something like that actually digestible enough for me. I was like, thank goodness, because otherwise I was completely at a loss.
See, I love you saying that, Rod, because that's how a client feels when we send them like an 80-page design proposal, right? They're like, wow, this is so complicated. This is very long. Like, I can't read this entire
Yeah, I
thing.
don't have time for this. I got stuff to do.
They wish for something
Yeah,
like Notebook LM, right? Where they're like, I wish I could just take this design proposal and it would give it to me and tell me if it's going to solve my problem, right?
yeah,
So that's what we're trying to
exactly.
do. It's like be that translation layer and make it more automated, easier, more immersive, more fun. Like design is cool. We should
Hmm.
try to like lean into the coolness of it because at the end of the day, I think we are a luxury experience, a luxury service, a premium service compared to other industries. Like especially the architecture side, right? Like design is a luxury, it's a privilege. It's a premium thing, premium cost. Like you don't have to hire an architect if you don't want to. Everybody should hire an architect, in my opinion, but I'm biased.
Yeah, but you have to sell yourself, right, and to get the job and to justify it. So here's speaking of some of the brass tacks of this, with the people that you're seeing so far that started to use this, and I understand you're an early startup. What have you seen as far as the improvement in the hit rate? And then what have you seen as far as reduction in time for a given proposal?
Yeah, I would say double digit improvement in hit rate. Some people started super low, so even higher, where they're like win rate was 5%. And then they're winning way more projects. And a lot of it actually has to do not with just how much easier and quicker it is to generate a proposal, but just to give you that go no go and to like tell you, hey man, you probably shouldn't go after this. I think that's something that we used to do at my old firm. We had a pursuit go no go scorecard that had like 6 different metrics of like what's the clout we'd get from this, what's the amount of money we get from this, how difficult is this, how long would this take, and if there's anything under 7, we probably wouldn't do it. I think firms don't even have that basic scorecard. like as a checklist that they can do. But we just try to turn that into, an actual like dashboard results that you get that,
Have you
more.
checked people that went after a project that was recommended for them not to pursue? And have there been situations where they in fact got it or didn't get it?
I
I'm
would
just
say,
curious on how accurate is that particular
yeah,
feature.
I don't know if we don't have like enough aggregate numbers to tell you a specific answer there, but I can say that there were people who went after projects that it recommended that they didn't do, and they lost. So I think right now the cost to go after projects is so high that you really have to be careful. But with Foveate, we do the decks that you make can be generated, right? So similar to like Gamma or Tome, Chronicle, Beautiful AI, like these slide deck AI apps, you can generate a deck with AI in Foveate, but it's coming from the research, and it's not designed to just be like a deck generator. Like it's supposed to be a little bit more rigorous than that, and you do have to put your own collateral in, so it's faster in that way. So we have seen a very large reduction in time spent there because you're not having to format every single slide, you're not having to write every single piece of text if you don't want to. So I would say that's at least twice as fast, if not more.
Interesting. So you're cutting down the number of projects you're bothering to go after, maybe by half, and you're increasing the time to be able to do this by half. Like it ends up being a pretty sizable improvement in overall performance then.
And you're personalizing the text that's going inside of your proposal. So it's increasing our win rate that way. I don't have the numbers for like how much that increases it by. Maybe in a couple of years we'll have that once we accumulate enough
Yeah,
data.
I'm almost
But
expecting some sort of a financial model that's dependent upon success of the user or something like that down the road.
that's what people are talking about, right? Where it's like, is all AI moving to be outcome based, right? I don't know, yeah, exactly how we would do that, and I don't know if people would be happy if we took a percentage
No,
of every one one project, but maybe
I
if
know
it
it's
was
like
like a
getting
low enough
taxed or
percentage
something like that. Like it
for
doesn't
every
like
win.
taxing someone's income. It sounds a little annoying.
Yeah, I don't think we could do that. Which, and at the end of the day, I just want to help people build better. I'm still an architect at heart. I want to walk out my door and see amazing experiences and build things and have new things to go to. And I just am not seeing it right now. And I think we have to basically help the industry do better. Like, not everything should just be a box, right? Like I think we can do better. We look at other countries who have way more history of design, who have better design, and I'm kind of like, we can do that, but it does require us to be a little bit more rigorous and to be able to sell our ideas better. Because I think at the end of the day, when you look at countries who are a little bit farther along with design in their culture, whether it's like France or Japan or Korea or something, like they have translated the value of design better into how that benefits the population, benefits the users, benefits the clients. And I think we can do that too, but maybe we just kind of lack tooling when it comes to finding the right clients, making sure we match, and then actually proposing ideas that that person would be into that we like as well, right? So kind of bridging
Well,
that
it's
gap.
interesting. Of course, I'm always careful when I to make too many parallels across cultures because there's great architecture in all places, and there's some not so great architecture in others. But the one thing that I think is absolutely fundamental here is a lot when people talk about sustainability, like it's the decisions you make very early on that really matter and become these immutable aspects of the design that drive the quality of that final outcome or have a overbearing importance in that final outcome. And what's fascinating here is you're putting that even further back to the point of even going after the job in the very first place. And you're saying that starts to set this trajectory of the overall quality of the project. And you have to start at the beginning. And most people, when they think start at the beginning, they think, oh, ideation or schematic design or pre design. You're saying, no,
Yeah, that's too late,
it's too
right?
late. It's
That's too
already
late.
too
You've
late.
already spent $30,000. You got to do that way earlier, in my opinion. And that's mostly as the guy who's doing it, where I'm just like, man, when I go receiving an RFP and sitting down, I'm just like, what do we even do here? And a lot of times, I get this RFP, might be told like, we should go after this. And I'm like, actually, no, we shouldn't. This does not have
Yeah, but
any of the
saying no is
parameters
so hard, though.
It's
That's the challenge, and that's where I like having a tool like this. It reminds me a little bit of something that AI's emerged in our house as like the this neutral voice of reason.
mhm.
It's like, so we have an argument with my kids about something, and they're like, "That's not true, Dad." I'm like, "I don't know. Ask AI." And then AI's like, says whatever I said, and I'm like, "Yeah, they'll believe that, but they won't believe
Yeah,
me." And I
it
feel like
is.
in some ways, maybe having this be that neutral voice is something that everyone can listen to, including the boss who had the gut
Mhm.
instinct.
Mhm. Yeah, there's this problem in firms. I call it the expert fallacy, where you'll have an expert within your organization. Let's say in BIM, this is happens a lot with BIM actually, where you have your BIM lead who knows everything there is about BIM, and then they'll recommend something, a BIM strategy, like a software they should purchase, and they'll get overruled by the principal who's like, "No, this is too expensive," or "I don't think this is going to solve our problem." But that person doesn't have any proof to back them up on either side. So of course, the person with a higher rank wins there. And what changes is when that person hires an external consultant. And then that consultant makes the same recommendation, right? All of a sudden, the principal firm leader is like, we got to trust the consultant. Like, that's all they
Yeah.
do. We're paying them to do this. They won't lie to us, right? So I think there is this kind of like baked in hierarchical bias, right? And AI is a very good neutral arbiter of that because it doesn't care. I think of it as a statistical inference engine that's 85% correct. So it's going to hallucinate 15% or make a mistake 15% of the time, but 85% of the time it's right. So if you can kind of lean into that, right, and understand it's going to make mistakes, but its assessment is going to be generally pretty good, then I think that will help you have the proof or have that neutral voice in the room that can kind of remove people's biases a little bit. I can't guarantee because the principal makes decisions at the end of the day, but yeah, if
But
they
also
have
that's
this neutral
sometimes where
arbiter.
the great stuff happens, right? It happens in the unconventional, it happens in the huge risks and things like that. So you don't want to completely eliminate
Right.
some of those big leaps.
And I
There's a
like
place for them.
the 15% hallucination, to be honest, where I'm like, oh, this is like pretty helpful. Where sometimes it'll recommend something that's a little bit left field where you're like, I would not have thought of that personally. Right.
It also gives you a good reason why you should always read, the
Yeah.
content before you hit send.
Yeah. And I think, that's the thing too of why Foveate is more of a co pilot or like um, confidant or guide or helper there is it's 15% of AI is going to be incorrect and messy and vague and abstract. So you really need that human polish to come in at the end and make sure that everything is right. And I don't think we
I
should
think,
lose that. But let's not give up our agency to the machine, right?
no, I don't think we should, but I think also if you were to ask someone, what is my correct hit rate? They would probably not say 85%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a good point.
this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think that you're onto something here. Like I said, this is totally unique, and it's hitting a problem that it's huge. Like if you don't get the job, you don't keep the doors open. It's simple as
Uh-huh.
that. And I also love this idea that it's actually in pursuit where you start the trajectory of whether or not this is going to be a great project. And you need to have the right tools early on. And that the fact that Foveate's hitting on that is absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us today. Great conversation.
Thank you, Rod. It was my pleasure to be here.